Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
I own 3,000 acres of ranch land. My great-great-grandfather carved it out when the government was practically handing land away to settlers. The boundaries haven't changed since then. I've got fence lines older than some of the cities nearby. For a long time, the nearest neighbors were miles off. And I liked it that way. But in the last 10 years, both sides of my land have been gobbled up by developers. Giant tracts sold off and diced up into little boxes with matching roofs and driveways. Now I've got two HOAs, one on my east side and one on the west. Little kingdoms with self-appointed royalty. At first, I figured they'd keep to themselves. My land is fenced and gated. The only real access is a gravel road that cuts through the northern woods and down to the main gate. I've got a small pond back there, some dense trees, and a couple clearings where I let groups like the Scouts camp sometimes. It's quiet, peaceful, or at least it used to be. Right after both HOAs were formed, I started getting letters. Pleasant at first. Invitations to join, community newsletters, and forms with bright, cartoony logos on top. I tossed them in a drawer. Then came the more pointed letters. As a bordering resident, you are eligible for immediate HOA membership. Then, failure to acknowledge membership may result in conflict over zoning and easement obligations. When I ignored that too, they started knocking. Always in pairs, clipboard in hand. One guy even showed up in a polo shirt embroidered with Eastside HOA Patrol. I told them flat out, I'm not joining anything. I don't care about your rules, your flowerbed standards, or your matching mailboxes. That's when the threats started. You're required to grant access to your gravel road for community usage. Your land falls under new residential zoning maps, which means certain areas may be subject to shared use designation. You'll be hearing from our legal counsel if you continue to obstruct community progress. I passed everything to my lawyer, Dan. He laughed so hard I thought he'd choke. You're fine, he told me. There's no way they can just rezone your property or claim easement out of nowhere. They're bluffing. At the start of, I led a local youth group camp in the North Woods. Same as always, they planned it months in advance. We set up a schedule, they brought portable toilets, and they stuck to the designated clearing. Not a soul from another HOA said a word, until I got two letters. One from Eastside, claiming that due to recent changes in community planning, the northern section of my property was now considered annexed common use area. The letter said my gravel road was legally declared a community access path. The second letter from Westside said something nearly identical. I called Dan. He nearly dropped the phone laughing. Then, just days later, I had to leave town for a family funeral. I was gone 3 weeks. When I came back, I nearly drove off the road. My gravel path was paved, the kind of cheap asphalt job you'd see in a parking lot. And worse, 3 small wooden cabins had been built in the north section. No one had called me. No one asked. They just did it. I stormed into my house and called Dan. What the hell is going on? He told me to take photos, videos, everything. Then he started making calls. The next morning, I heard yelling at the gate. I walked down and found a group of people from both HOAs screaming at each other in front of my property. Eastside accused Westside of overstepping boundaries. Westside said Eastside wasn't authorized to allow structures, and both of them kept insisting the road and the land belonged to the community. I stepped between them. Get off my land, all of you. One woman shoved a paper at me. This is a notice of easement. You can't block access. I took one look and handed it back. This is printed from Google Maps with a crayon outline. Someone else tried to explain they'd held a vote. We held an emergency meeting and agreed to expand the walking path through your section. You held a meeting about land? They started shouting again. I walked back up to the house and called the sheriff. The deputies showed up and started asking questions. I showed them my deed, pointed out the old boundary markers. They couldn't remove anyone directly, but they strongly encouraged the groups to leave and reminded them that unauthorized construction on private land was criminal trespass. That afternoon, I called in a contractor and had a massive steel gate installed across the entrance. 2 days later, I was served. Both HOAs were suing me. Claims of obstruction, community interference, violation of easement. They both wanted access to the road, and neither of them would admit the other had no rights either. Dan looked over the lawsuits and smiled. They've officially lost their minds. Let's countersue. And so it began. My lawyer, Dan, called me the next morning. We're filing a motion to dismiss both lawsuits. And after that, we go nuclear. I like the sound of nuclear, he chuckled. We're going to subpoena every record those HOA boards have. Financials, meeting minutes, communications, everything. Let's see how well they handle being on the receiving end. The first hearing was set for the following month, but the harassment didn't slow down. If anything, it got worse. Every other day, someone from one of the HOAs would come by the new gate. I installed a speaker system so I didn't have to walk all the way down. Some of the things they said into that intercom could have filled a comedy special. Mr. Carson, you are in violation of Section 4.3 regarding public access recreational areas. I don't live in your neighborhood. This is bigger than you. Another time, some guy claiming to be the Eastside HOA's legal consultant started reading code numbers at me through the gate, like I'd get scared and throw him the keys. And then the signs started popping up. Laminated notices stapled to fence posts along my property line, warning that community activities are temporarily suspended due to hostile occupation. Hostile. Me. I took a few down and tossed them in a pile. I wasn't going to let them get to me, but I'll admit, I started documenting everything. Photos, video, times, and dates. The Westside HOA tried a different tactic. One of their board members, a guy named Len, came to the gate alone one afternoon. I recognized him as one of the shouters from before. "Look, John," he said, leaning into the mic. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Eastside's going way overboard here, and we'd be willing to support your case against them. We could say the road never belonged to them. Help you prove it. Why would you do that?" "Well," he said with a slimy grin, "in exchange, we'd like to make sure Westside gets exclusive access to the camping zone. Just some shared use agreements. Non-binding, you know, friendly terms." "Let me get this straight," I said. "You'll help me screw HOA number 1 if I let HOA number 2 use my private land like it's a state park?" "Exactly." I laughed and hung up the intercom. The next week, someone dumped a pile of gravel in front of my gate, blocking my truck in. No note, no explanation. I called the sheriff again. Deputy Carlson came out and helped me move the gravel with his own shovel. "You're going to need a camera pointing this way too," he said, pointing toward the road. They're escalating. The day before the hearing, both HOAs sent new letters. The Eastside HOA had added an extra complaint, alleging emotional damages due to the sudden loss of access to nature walks and scenic trails. Westside accused me of removing essential infrastructure, whatever the hell that meant. Dan tore into both filings at the courthouse. He opened with, "Your Honor, my client owns this land free and clear, title going back over a century. There is no public easement, no annexation, and no legal foundation for any of these claims. The plaintiffs are attempting to override private property rights using fabricated authority." The judge, an older woman with a skeptical eyebrow and a huge mug of coffee, gave a sideways look to both HOA attorneys. Eastside's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, due to community connectivity ordinances and regional planning guidelines, we believe there was precedent to integrate." "You believe?" "Did you verify ownership before annexing a pond?" The guy stammered. "Well, the maps don't override a deed." "Sit down." Westside's attorney wasn't any better. Tried to argue prescriptive use, saying residents had walked the edge of my woods for years, so they had informal rights. Dan stood up and handed the judge aerial photos with dates on them, showing fence lines, locked gates, and zero public access. "We also have camera footage," Dan added, "of HOA members installing cabins, signs, and paving without consent. We'll be filing a countersuit for trespass, vandalism, and attempted seizure of private land." The judge nodded slowly. "Continue this hearing next month. I want everything filed by then." "Both sides? And Mr. Carson?" "Yes." "Your Honor, install more locks. You're going to need them." I wasn't exactly nervous, but I wasn't sleeping much either. Every noise outside after dark made me grab the spotlight and sweep the property. One night, I caught 2 guys sneaking around the tree line. I shouted, and they ran, left behind a plastic tub filled with printed flyers. I collected one and stared at the headline, "Open our lands, say no to greedy land barons." It had a cartoon of me drawn like some Monopoly villain. The sheriff came out again and took the tub for evidence. But by now, even he looked tired of this. "They're playing dirty, but it's all going to come out in court. Keep that gate locked." Next hearing, Dan introduced emails we'd subpoenaed. Westside's board had been emailing Eastside's board for months, trying to hash out a territorial agreement over my land like I wasn't even in the picture. One email from a woman named Sharon read, "We'll get control of the road and camping area one way or another. John won't hold out forever." The judge stared at the printed email. Do either of you realize this is illegal? Do you? Eastside's lawyer tried to redirect. Your Honor, these were merely aspirational discussions. Aspirational? This isn't therapy. This is court. Then Dan presented photos of the cabins. We found out through court documents that Eastside had used HOA funds to pay an unlicensed contractor, who, by the way, happened to be the cousin of one of their board members. The judge scribbled something quickly. We'll be opening a separate investigation into misuse of community funds, she said flatly. And as for Mr. Carson's countersuit, we will proceed to discovery. Back outside the courthouse, two groups of HOA members were arguing on the steps. Someone from Eastside yelled, "You're just mad we were smarter." "Smarter? You broke the law, idiot!" Someone from Westside screamed back. Dan leaned over to me. "That right there? That's going to win this for us." "How?" "Because they can't even pretend to be unified. They're tearing each other apart." I grinned. "Good, let them." That night I received a letter slipped under my gate, unsigned. It read, "Drop the suit or things will get messy." Messy had already come and gone. I handed the note to Dan the next morning. We might be adding witness intimidation to the charges. We were 2 weeks out from the next court date when Dan walked into my kitchen looking smug. "Guess what?" he said, waving papers. "What?" "I've got enough here to request sanctions against both HOAs. And we can start pursuing damages. Real ones. Property repair, legal fees, emotional distress. And I think we'll win." I nodded. "Good. Let's burn it down. I'll tell you what, it's a strange thing to be at the center of a storm that you didn't start. Especially when that storm is two rival HOAs tearing at each other's throats over land that doesn't even belong to them." By the time we got into the courtroom for the first preliminary hearing, it felt like I was living in a satire. Except no one was laughing. Dan and I walked into that courtroom with boxes of evidence. Photos of my land, aerial shots from before and after the paving job, footage of their squabbling at the gate, and all the letters they sent me. He had it organized like a man going to war. On the other side, both HOAs had shown up with separate attorneys and half their boards in tow. One group sat on the left side of the courtroom, the other on the right, glaring across the aisle like it was some sort of neighborhood standoff. The judge, an older woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, asked them both the same question. "Which one of you thinks you have legal jurisdiction over the north section of Mr. Parker's land?" Eastside's lawyer stood. "We have documentation filed with the county regarding a community initiative that involves mutual access pathways through the region." Westside's lawyer jumped in. "That initiative was not approved. Additionally, our claim is based on an older, informal agreement regarding shared recreational land use." The judge held up a hand. "So you're both admitting you never got explicit permission from the landowner?" Silence. Dan leaned over and whispered, "They've already sunk themselves." That hearing didn't settle anything, but it gave us momentum. Dan filed the countersuit immediately. Trespassing, property damage, illegal construction, and harassment. I gave statements. Dan called in surveyors to reaffirm the original property lines and prove the paving and cabins sat entirely on my land. The infighting between the HOAs grew worse. They started sabotaging each other's meetings. One group put out flyers accusing the other of embezzling HOA funds to pay for the cabins. Someone from Westside leaked emails showing Eastside had forged a county planning document. Meanwhile, they wouldn't leave me alone. Despite the lawsuits, people still tried to climb the fence or squeeze through the gate when deliveries came in. I had to install cameras, motion sensors, lights, and a speaker system. I caught one guy trying to spray paint over the gate keypad. Another woman claimed she was checking on her future cabin. One day, I found tire tracks leading up to the pond and back. They'd snuck in through the woods. That's when I started posting guards, armed, off-duty officers that Dan arranged. Just standing watch on the weekends. A deterrent. It worked for about a month. Then came the protest. About 30 people from both HOAs, some in matching shirts, showed up on a Saturday morning and stood outside the gate with signs, "Open access for all," and "Public land should be shared." They had a megaphone. Someone brought a drum. They yelled slogans and tried to chant over the loud warnings from my security system. I sat on my porch with a coffee and watched until the deputies arrived. They ordered the group to leave. Some resisted. A few were arrested. I later found out that one of the people cuffed was the Eastside HOA president's daughter. Dan filed an emergency injunction to prohibit HOA members from entering or approaching within 300 feet of my property line. It passed. Then, the stories started spreading online. The HOAs put out their version, that I had stolen a community camping area, that I was HOAing land that had once been public by nature, and that I was using wealth to suppress neighborhood initiatives. People I'd never met sent me emails with thinly veiled threats. Someone left a bag of trash in my driveway with a note that said, "We're not done yet." The sheriff increased patrols, but even he admitted he'd never seen anything like it. "You'd think you stole their church," he said one night, "except you didn't steal a damn thing." Meanwhile, the court scheduled depositions. I sat across the table from both HOA presidents as they tried to explain how they believed they had authority to build on private land. Their explanations were all over the place. We were under the impression. It was understood. We assumed. Dan picked them apart like a surgeon. "Did you ever receive written permission from Mr. Parker to use the road?" "No." "Did you file any zoning changes with county approval that specifically included Mr. Parker's land?" "No." "Then why, in God's name, did you build cabins on it?" "Because we thought," Dan cut him off, "that's not how land ownership works." The judge wasn't buying any of it. And the jury, when the time came, looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. By the middle of the trial, the two HOA boards had completely turned on each other. One witness, a secretary from Westside, testified that Eastside had promised to cover the cabin costs if they handled construction. Eastside denied that completely. They brought in receipts from personal accounts, trying to distance themselves. The whole thing was a circus. At one point, Eastside's president claimed he believed my land had been abandoned. Dan stood and showed a photo of me on my tractor from 2 weeks before the cabins were built. "Does this look abandoned to you?" I didn't know he was still actively living there. "You thought he just left his gate locked and turned the lights on remotely?" When we finally got to my testimony, I told it straight. "I've lived here all my life. This land has been in my family for generations. I let youth groups camp because I believed in giving kids a place to experience nature. These people took advantage of that. They broke in, built things, lied to each other, lied to me, and now they want to claim I owe them something?" Dan let it sit for a moment before saying, "No further questions." The courtroom was quiet. The closing arguments were brutal. Eastside's lawyer tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. Westside's lawyer said Eastside was the real villain. Dan stood up and told the jury, "This case isn't about misunderstandings. It's about arrogance, entitlement, and disregard for the law." My client's only mistake was trusting that his neighbors wouldn't try to steal from him. When the verdict came down, I nearly didn't believe it. The court ruled fully in my favor. The cabins had to be removed. I was awarded damages for property destruction, emotional distress, and legal costs. The judge added that the HOAs were barred from any future attempts to access or claim my property. But it didn't end there. Within a month, both HOA presidents resigned. A recall vote happened in Eastside. Westside split into two factions. New lawsuits emerged between their members. They blamed each other for the loss, for the legal bills, for the mess. I stayed out of it. I watched from my porch as they tore themselves apart. And every now and then, I'd drive past the former cabin sites, just piles of scrap now, and remind myself, they tried to take what wasn't theirs. And all it got them was legal ruin and neighborhood chaos. After the verdict, I thought maybe things would quiet down. You'd think being dragged through the legal mud and losing would give these people some pause. But no, both HOAs, despite their broken leadership and shredded reputations, couldn't resist doubling down. It started with mail, not from them directly, of course. They got smarter. Now it was concerned community members asking if I'd consider reopening a dialogue about integration into the neighborhood ecosystem. One letter had a sketch of my pond with picnic tables and kayaks drawn in. Another said, "Our children deserve nature access." I posted the letters online and let the world laugh at them. Then someone tried to start a petition. It didn't get far, only about 40 signatures, and most of those were fake names. But the point was clear. The harassment wasn't over. Meanwhile, the HOAs turned on each other. Eastside accused Westside of orchestrating the cabin debacle. Westside claimed Eastside forged planning documents. Lawsuits flew back and forth. One former board member wrote a manifesto-style email and sent it to every household in both neighborhoods. It started with, "We were promised community," and ended with, "John Parker has exposed the rot." Dan printed that one and framed it in his office. I stayed quiet. No interviews, no comments. I let the stories spin themselves out. But I did start making changes. The steel gate became an electric sliding barricade with coded entry. The cameras were upgraded. I had bright LED floodlights installed around the perimeter. And I planted trees. Big, fast-growing ones, along the fence line to block any view of my land. Then came the audit. Apparently, one of the HOAs had misused funds trying to finance the road paving. The paper trail led straight to their treasurer, who swore they were told it was approved. The resulting investigation revealed a mess of financial impropriety. Homeowners demanded resignations. Emergency meetings were called. Fights broke out in parking lots. Someone spray-painted "Communists" on the Eastside HOA office window. Through it all, my land stayed mine. But they couldn't leave well enough alone. One afternoon, a drone buzzed over the tree line. I shot it out of the sky with a pellet rifle. Another time, someone cut one of my fences. Cattle from a neighboring ranch wandered in, even though I didn't keep livestock. Took me hours to sort out. Then I got a letter from the county. A zoning complaint had been filed. Multiple complaints, actually, claiming I was running an unlicensed campground, that I had unregistered dwellings, the barn, and that I was in violation of setback laws with my new trees. Dan handled it. The inspector came out, walked the property, and left chuckling. They really thought you were going to get cited for planting trees? Apparently. They're not going to stop, you know. I'm counting on it, because that's when I made my final move. Dan helped me file a civil RICO suit. Racketeering. It was a stretch, but not impossible. The coordinated efforts, the fraudulent documents, the financial mismanagement, the conspiracy to take control of private property, it all added up. The county refused to touch it, but in federal court, it turned heads. Depositions started again. This time, the pressure cracked them wide open. Board members confessed to targeting me because they felt he didn't contribute to the community. Some said they were pressured. One claimed he was told, "No one will care. He's rich." The judge wasn't amused. And the final blow? Federal investigators uncovered a falsified deed transfer attempt. Someone in Westside tried to record a quitclaim deed claiming I donated the north section to the HOA. The signature wasn't even close to mine. When that came out, it was over. The court dissolved both HOAs, found them to be engaged in a coordinated campaign of harassment, property interference, and fraud. Several former board members were barred from holding administrative positions in any organized housing group in the state. Fines were levied. Some were criminally charged. The neighborhoods tried to rally. Briefly, they formed a new group, calling themselves a community coalition, but nobody joined. The stink was too thick. The name, Parker, was burned into every conversation about local politics, property rights, and HOA reform. I didn't celebrate. Not really. I didn't throw a party or give a speech. I just stood on my porch one evening, looked out over the trees that now blocked every neighbor's view, and thought about my great-great-grandfather. He cleared this land with his hands, lived in a one-room shack with a dirt floor and a tin roof, built everything from nothing. And now, over a century later, it nearly got taken away by people who thought matching mailboxes and monthly potlucks gave them the right. They wanted to make me part of their little fantasy. Instead, they destroyed themselves. The cabins are gone. The gate stands strong. And I still sit here every morning with my coffee, watching the wind ripple through the pond. And if they ever try again, well, I've got room for more gates.
This is why HOAs need to be banned outright. Jesus, this whole saga is just another example of why HOAs are little wannabe dictatorship run by board control freaks. Imagine thinking you can just redraw someone else's property lines because your little gated fantasy doesn't extend far enough. The fact that they built structures on his land while he was gone is straight up criminal. It's not miscommunication, it's not a misunderstanding, it's theft. Land theft. They thought he'd just roll over because he's one guy and they had logos and newsletters, burn them all down, metaphorically, of course, unless. The fact that they forged deeds and tried to make it look like he donated his land, that's mafia tier behavior. Hope they all lose their homes in civil suits and get stuck living under a bridge with matching mailboxes. The entitlement is nuclear. The part that made me want to throw my phone, the letters after the trial, after they got destroyed in court. Our children deserve nature access. What the hell kind of deranged entitlement do you have to believe someone else's private land is your kid's playground? If you want pond access and tree forts, buy your own 3,000 acres. But no, they expected him to just open the gates and give it up for free because community vibes? No, the only thing those kids deserve is a lesson in boundaries and the consequences of trying to play SimCity with real property. Hope those HOAs rot. Oh boo-hoo, they just wanted community unity. No, they wanted control. They saw land they didn't own and decided to rewrite reality around it. Then they whined when it blew up in their faces. The absolute gall to act like he was the one causing problems while they were literally sneaking into his property and building crap without permission. This wasn't miscommunication. This was coordinated harassment by people who believed the word neighborhood meant dictatorship. They lost everything because they wouldn't accept a basic boundary. And now they get to live next to a man they tried to rob, knowing everyone else knows they failed. Good, let it burn.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.